discussion on this major issue of apostasy, Sharia law, and human rights. Now, I'm going to introduce them, although you will know many of them, and they all have a glowing record of campaigning for freedom and human rights for everybody. Now, you know Mina Ahadi. You have heard her absolutely inspiring speech at the beginning of this conference, and we couldn't have got off to a better start. Now, this on my right is Bahram Saroush, who is a human rights campaigner, and then we have Roy Brown. Roy Brown is, again, international representative of International Humanist and Ethical Union. And I have to tell you that Keith Porteous Wood, who is the executive director of National Secular Society, has come and stood in at the last moment because Terry Sanderson was prevented from coming by illness. So what we're going to do now is we're going to ask each speaker to speak for up to 7 minutes, and after they have all had their say, it's going to be thrown open to the floor, and you will have your opportunity for questions and discussion. So now I'm hoping that instead of finishing at 10 to 1, we will craftily take a few more extra minutes if we need them, because we have lost some minutes. Very fortunately lost to Mina's informative and very inspiring talk. But now I will start by calling upon Bahram to open the discussion. Would you speak to us for about 7 minutes?
Thanks, Muriel. And the topic of this panel is international apostasy and apostasy in the world today. I'm going to say a few words mainly about apostasy and Islam and Sharia law. For many of you, it will not be something which comes as a big surprise, because in Islam and Sharia law, apostasy has a fixed punishment, and that is death. And there's no dispute amongst even the Islamic supporters of apostasy. Apostasy is mentioned in the Quran, in the Hadith, and within the Islamic community. It's important to point out that when we are talking about Islamic edicts, it is not just the Quran which is the source. We are talking about Islam as a movement, as a tradition, and as something very deep-rooted which has existed. And if you want to look for sources, you have to look in all directions, in many sources. And when you look at those sources, you find something extremely horrific. A lot of people might think that apostasy is just a wholesale rejection of your former religion. In Sharia, it is more than that. It's just even a denial of any principle of Islam, or even a practice, doesn't have to be verbal, is enough to make you an apostate. And for example, if you say that you believe that the universe has existed from eternity, if you believe in reincarnation, then you're an apostate. If you defame the Prophet, his character, Muhammad, you are an apostate. if you go into a church, we're talking about Muslims, and I would just, if I have a couple of minutes, I'll come to that. We're talking about Muslims either by parenthood, born into from Muslim parents, or someone who has converted to Islam and then decides to leave it. And even any practice, for example, like burning the Quran or soiling it in some way, can be considered apostasy. The printed copy of the Quran, which for that reason it's very advisable nowadays just to use an electronic copy if you're going to handle it, because then there's no danger of that. But in any case, I think they hadn't envisaged that, that could be done. Probably they'll come with something against that as well. But one of the questions was why religions, and in this particular case I'm talking about Islam, has these laws against apostasy and these cruel punishments. I think the reasons could be historical religious, if we could distinguish historical religious from the time that Islam developed, but also the current political, and I think it's important to make that distinction. So from tribal wars, religious wars, where you wanted to keep the community together, like in an army, if you desert, you are shot, to use that for control, historically. But it's used today in the 21st century, in the 20th century, 21st century, as a means of political control. In my view, as an easy, shortcut way of eliminating your dissidents, as an easy way of getting rid of your political rivals, people who are protesting against your power, against your rule. And that is why, for example, in a country like Iran, we see it practiced. And then you don't have to prove any political dissent in any laborious procedure. You just need to say that this person is an apostate. Thousands of people in Iran, for example, were executed on that charge. And it was mixed with other, for example, enmity against God, waging war against God, waging war against the establishment, and also irtidad, means apostasy, being murtad, an apostate. And for just one example, the wholesale massacre of political prisoners in 1987, who had come to the end of their terms of prison, was done after interviews. Religious questions were asked about Islam, if you were praying or not, very simple questions. And if you failed in any of those questions, then you were executed, and thousands were executed. So, just as we speak now, in Iran, there is one person who is a Christian who's has been sentenced to death. So it's not something that we are talking about historically. This is going on every day. There's another person who has been, he's in the process of being charged. I'll just give their names. It's Yusuf Nadar Khani. He's a Christian pastor, and he's been sentenced to death in the city of Rasht, and Behruz Kanjani, and he's in the process of being sentenced as well. So, okay, I'll just come to the end of what I'm saying in this introduction. Just to sum up, I think why religions, and in this particular case, Islam, uses apostasy, and I think it's not just out of religious, being a religious doctrinaire, but it's in my view, it's a political means. It's a very convenient political religion, and part of that religion, a charge in order to keep the population in control, and especially women as well. So maybe in the part of discussions, I'll come to that. Thanks.